You're watching Force 13's live streaming service.
This morning we are continuing to monitor Hurricane Eta as it pushes towards the Nicaragua coast, as it looks a lot weaker than what it did last night when it was almost a Category 5 hurricane, believe it or not. My name's Ethan Bruning, this is Force 13 Live, and I am joined by my live team consisting of Thomas, Ike, and Christian. How are you all doing tonight? Or this morning, I should say.
I said last night that we'd have landfall coverage. This is it. And yeah, I mean, you're completely correct, Ethan. The storm does look quite a bit weaker. It's undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle. We got more recon since when we ended off last night. The storm is significantly weaker. I believe we're running with the NHC's intensity estimate down to 145, so 10 miles per hour lower than it was at this point last night. So
Absolutely. I just want to go over the latest watches and warnings real quick related to ETA. A hurricane warning is in effect for the coast of Nicaragua from the Honduras-Nicaragua border to Sandy Bay Sirpi. A tropical storm warning is in effect for the northeastern coast of Honduras from Puerto Patuca to the Honduras-Nicaragua border. A hurricane watch is in effect for the northeastern coast of Honduras from Puerto Patuca to the Honduras-Nicaragua border. A tropical storm watch is in effect for the northeastern coast of Honduras from west of Puerto Patuca westward to Punta Castilla. I should note that with this storm making landfall, it is forecast currently to dissipate over land. However, Ada's story might not be complete even after that, because the National Hurricane Center are indeed forecasting regeneration of this system. Now, Thomas, I see that you've got some satellite imagery up here.
I do have some satellite imagery up here, and this is just some rapid scan courtesy of RAM Slider. And you can see a couple of things. First of all, it's very clear that you have that first eye that's really holding on for dear life, and that second eye, which you can see around it, that's trying to clear. This is really good news. Basically, you're going to be getting a storm that's weakening slowly, and you're going to be getting a storm that's not going to be able to intensify to its maximum potential. I honestly believe if it weren't for this potential Eyewall replacement cycle, well, this definite Eyewall replacement cycle going on right now, we'd be looking at a very different story at this point. But this hard to predict Eyewall replacement cycle that has begun is the only real silver lining I see from this, because the stronger the storm, the worse the winds, and not only that, the worse the rainfall as well. So
Absolutely, and at least an Eyewall replacement cycle, it's good in some ways, but it's also bad because when a storm undergoes an Eyewall replacement cycle, its wind field expands, which means that the storm essentially gets larger, and that means that more population areas are at risk. However, at the same time, the wind threat also decreases a little bit. So this certainly isn't a good situation, which means that more areas will be receiving more heavy amounts of rainfall. If you do have any comments or questions, please do send them in to the live chat, and we will be able to answer them in due course. We're receiving several questions right now that, was the storm a Category 5? Is it going to become a Category 5? What are our team's thoughts on that?
this, we have no evidence to indicate that this was ever a Category 5, with the exception possibly of some satellite appearance data from earlier today. But that's really all that we have right now when it comes to the possibility of this being a Category 5, actually earlier yesterday. But we don't have any reconnaissance evidence. We don't have anything like that. So at least for now, Force 13 will be running with this peaking at 155 miles per hour, 924 millibars, and we're going to be having as well, I think it's safe to say the chance of this becoming a Category 5 is extraordinarily low. Like, it's not happening at this point.
Again, we really only have evidence to support a high-end Category 4, but we cannot say that it ever reached Category 5 status.
Will the storm complete its Eyewall replacement cycle before landfall? Well, that has yet to be seen. But judging by how fast it's moved only 4 miles in the last 30 minutes. So it's moving at around 8 miles per hour. Landfall could be as early as the bottom of this hour, or it could be several hours later, perhaps into tomorrow morning. It just depends on how fast the storm moves. What stage?
Storm is.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, this storm's moving at an absolute crawl right now, so it's really hard to predict when we're going to see landfall.
That is a good observation. What is this storm right now on the CDPS scale? Last I heard
9.
from Devon, it was a stage 9 on the CDPS scale, but that intensity estimate, I'd assume, was taking into account a Category 5 landfall. I don't think that's going to happen anymore, luckily, so I'd assume it's down to a stage 8.
That is correct. This is down to a stage 8 on the CDPS scale. Devon was nice enough to put a little frame of reference somewhere. I just have it with me. I don't have the specific message, but he did say that if the storm were to make a 155 mile per hour above landfall, it would be a stage 9. So we have downgraded it to a stage 8 as a result of that not happening. Something that I do want to pull up here real quick. It's on my screen now. This is a really cool product that NOAA offers. This shows you the extrapolated rainfall that's fallen over the last day or so. And with that quantitative precipitation, you can see there a point of over 20 inches of rain has fallen just on shore. And you can also see there significant amounts of rainfall over land as well over 8 inches in numerous areas. You can see despite the center being offshore, the bulk of the rain is on the side of land. The reason for that is because of the friction of land. So you stop getting those updrafts suspending the rain in the air. Therefore, you get the heavier rain. That's what's going on. But you can see there rather clearly that some quite heavy rainfall has occurred. Catastrophic flooding is expected to continue.
Could this storm get a secondary peak in the Caribbean Sea? Well, I know that last night the European model took Eta 2, I guess we can call it, down into the 930s in the pressure.
My, really?
It did briefly. The latest model I did see took it down into, I believe, the 970s in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's obviously, it just depends on how much the storm meanders and how much land interaction it has. But I'd say a second peak is entirely possible.
I would be inclined to agree with that. You can actually see I have the GFS pulled up here if we want to take a look at it. And this is one of many possible solutions that we have for this storm. But I want you to keep an eye on the Caribbean here because there are going to be a lot of things that are going to produce a lot of uncertainty with the future of this particular storm. So as I have the GFS pulled up right here, you can see the landfall occur. And after the landfall occurs here in about 3 to 6 hours, and you can see there's virtually no movement from the storm after it makes landfall. So again, catastrophic flooding being an issue. You can see it's a remnant low by this point. This is around 0Z Thursday, which would translate to about 6 o'clock Central Standard Time on Thursday or Wednesday. So 6 o'clock Central Standard Time Wednesday, you have a remnant low, but you have a very large area of influence. So this is when things get uncertain. There's a very large area here where this could redevelop after it reemerges. We don't know where exactly it's going to reemerge, and where it does is going to be important because it looks like we have a pressure minimum that's also occurring over in the Eastern Pacific. Those could influence each other, but you'll notice that pressure minimum in the Eastern Pacific does head into the Atlantic. It's way over here, and you're going to see kind of a little bit of a Fujiwara kind of thing going on, I believe. In that, yeah, you see that southward movement, but a very large system coming out from Ada as the remnant heads into the Caribbean. And then it looks like the GFS wants this heading into the Gulf of Mexico, but it then stalls it. So what it looks like is going on is steering currents for a while are actually quite weak. This isn't actually influenced by steering all that much. This high pressure system really blocking to the north. The reason why the storm's moving is because the GFS is relying on a pressure minimum to the south, allowing a Fujiwara effect to occur. That's the only reason that the GFS predicts movement. And I'm sure this means that in model guidance, we're seeing a bigger spread. And you can see right there, we are seeing a larger spread, especially as we get towards Cuba. But the overall movement of this is rather uncertain after it moves back out.
So, so just based on what you just showed there, Thomas, I'd say that we have general confidence this is going to redevelop in the Caribbean Sea. It's just a question of where it goes and what intensity, if I would be
Yeah.
correct there. Okay. We also do have, right now, around the world, we do have Tropical Storm Goni approaching Vietnam, last I recalled, with winds of 40 miles per hour. I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone can correct me on that. And we also have its similar cousin, Atsani, approaching the Philippines. Are there any signal warnings in effect for Atsani right now?
Nope.
All
No,
right,
I
that
believe
is
gas has
very
any
good
warnings.
news. I did look at the forecast for Atsani earlier. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center is forecasting a 70 mile an hour peak for Atsani, just as it passes by Luzon to the north. So that is certainly good news that the Philippines will be getting a bypass from this storm. However, heavy rainfall does indeed remain possible. However,
Yeah.
looking towards Ada, it is a extremely dangerous situation with a landfall likely sometime in the next few hours. We are now
It's
joined by Orlando. If you're there, Orlando, how are you?
Good morning. Doing quite well. It's just analyzing the situation still after rising up this morning, and still it's a very dangerous situation for Nicaragua and Honduras, uh, as we all know very well, and it's a very unfortunate circumstance that we're dealing with.
What do you think that this storm peaked at last night, Orlando?
Personally, of course, officials did not go ahead and raise the intensity to Category 5, but at this point, there really isn't um, much of a big difference unless it was an extremely strong Category 5, because at this point, it's just we're already expecting massive levels of destruction from the rain and storm surge, accompanied with the already extreme winds. So honestly, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but personally, I'd say at least 160 miles per hour as the storm was peaking out after reconnaissance flights departed.
So you think this storm was a Category 5? That's
Yes, I believe it was a Category 5.
that's interesting. I'm sure that we'll have quite a long debate about that even after the storm is dissipating. I'd just like to go over the latest National Hurricane Center forecast code that we have currently right here. They are forecasting a Category 4 landfall, pretty inevitable that's going to occur. However, if the storm does continue to stall, it may weaken even further than what it is right now. However, that would mean more rainfall, so either way, this is an extremely dangerous situation, and unfortunately, this storm isn't going to go away whether we like it or not. However, the National Hurricane Center is indeed forecasting rapid dissipation of the system over Central America. Interestingly, though, Thomas, they do have the 48-hour point as a tropical depression, and I know that you were pointing out that it might have been a remnant low at that point.
Kind of surprised that they keep it as a tropical cyclone in 48 hours' time. The terrain in Honduras and Nicaragua is very mountainous, so I don't I honestly don't see this low-level circulation surviving for very long at all. I think that the best shower of this is the H wharf. Let me see if I can get that pulled up. But this right here, you have and this is actually a significantly stronger storm than what we have right now. But the storm weakens very quickly after it hits land, and you can see just it gets completely disheveled by the mountains. Like you can't tell where the closed isobars are, and we have complete dissipation of the low within 45 hours of the run. I mean, that's what I'm expecting. I mean, the terrain is so mountainous. Like literally, you're going to have a low-level circulation at the surface. There's going to be so many mountains that as the counterclockwise flow attempts to happen, mountains are literally going to block it, and the circulation is going to be too weak to go over the mountain. Like that's literally what's going to happen. You're going to get so much friction, the storm's not going to be able to survive. You're going to get a remnant low, and then that may regenerate as we head in to the Caribbean, which the H-Wharf kind of anticipates, but it still shows an absolute mess of a system heading out of this. So I don't see it being a tropical cyclone in 48 hours.
I would honestly be inclined to agree with that. But the National Hurricane Center will be updating their latest forecast at the top of this hour in about 45 minutes or so. So we'll have to see what they run with. I'd imagine they would actually potentially decrease the intensity a little bit more, given that the storm is undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle. Regardless, this is the National Hurricane Center's key messages as it loads up here on my screen. I'm just going to read these off here. Catastrophic wind damage is expected where Ada's Eyewall moves onshore along the northeastern coast of Nicaragua this morning. Tropical storm force or greater winds are already occurring within the hurricane warning area in Nicaragua. A tropical storm warning is also in effect for the northeastern coast of Honduras. A catastrophic and life-threatening storm surge, along with destructive waves, are expected along portions of the northeastern coast of Nicaragua, near and to the north of where the center makes landfall. Water levels could reach as high as 14 to 21 feet above normal tide levels in some parts of the hurricane warning area. Preparations to protect life and property should now be complete. Through Friday evening, heavy rainfall from Ada will lead to catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding and river flooding along portions of Central America, along with landslides in areas of higher terrain. Flash and river flooding is also possible across Jamaica, southeast Mexico, El Salvador, southern Haiti, and the Cayman Islands, as Ada pushes off towards the northeast out in the Caribbean Sea. With that being said, going back to the satellite imagery, the eye, at least in my view, appears to be struggling to reemerge. What are our team's thoughts on that?
Well, what it looks like is going on is that inner eye wall is still holding on. I mean, if you look at your imagery there, I mean, you can see very clearly the cloud minimum. That minimum that is around the current inner eye wall. You can see those minus 70s and those blacks, and you can see that ring of higher temperatures in the minus 60s and 50s there, and then you can see right away that ring, that big CDO of those minus 70s. So you can see that inner eye wall is still holding on. It's still holding on for dear life right now, and I think that that's the reason that this storm is basically going to be able to really remain this weak before landfall, and that's definitely good news that it isn't going to be able to strengthen much more. The bad news is that wind field is expanding right now. That radius of maximum winds is likely expanding as well. But as long as the inner and outer eye wall are fighting each other, we're not going to be seeing any strengthening.
That is really good news. As of the intermediate advisory statement from the National Hurricane Center, they did say that hurricane force winds extend outwards up to 25 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend outward up to 125 miles. A sustained winds of 69 miles per hour with gusts to 103 miles per hour were reported at Puerto Cabezas Airport in Nicaragua, so there are certainly high winds already occurring on land as the storm is really closing in. If you do have any comments or questions, please do send them into the live chat, and we will get them in due course. I'd just like to point out that we do think that this storm did peak with winds of 155 miles an hour. It's down to 145, which is really good news for this storm, but it's not at the same time because given that the storm is undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle, as Thomas said, the wind field is getting larger, and that is certainly not good news. Now, I'm sure, Thomas, you could highlight on the rainfall aspect that we're forecasting for the storm. Do you know how many inches of rainfall we're forecasting?
So I checked, it was over 30 inches. I can check the National Hurricane Center real quick to find out what additional rainfall they're expecting, but my expectation is local areas getting well over 3 additional feet of rain on top of what they've already gotten. The National Hurricane Center is saying that an additional 15 to 25 inches of rain is possible for Nicaragua and Honduras. They're saying that isolated amounts of over 35 inches of additional rain are still possible, which is absolutely astonishing, and it's worrying to say the least as well. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see totals observed after this over 50 inches. I mean, the storm's going to be stalling there forever, and that mountainous terrain is only going to increase the convective processes that allow for rainfall. So I'm really, really worried about the possibility of this thing dropping a ton of rain. I mean, we've already seen catastrophic flooding from Honduras and Nicaragua, so it only gets worse from here for these next few hours, and the longer this storm stalls, the worse this is going to be.
That is a really unfortunate situation that this storm is continuing to stall. I just want to estimate the current distance from land, I guess you could say. So right there's the eye. It is about roughly 21 miles offshore. That's gone down slightly from 25 around 25 minutes ago, so the storm appears to be closing in on land. Can Hurricane Ada cause rainfall compared to perhaps Hurricane Mitch or Hurricane Harvey?
Compared to Harvey, I don't think so. How much did Harvey produce? Like over 70 inches? Like it was something crazy.
I think it's a lot higher than that. I know that Mitch
The,
produced 70 inches of rainfall, unofficially, but
uh,
around there.
yeah. I know that a lot of things about Mitch. Mitch actually had rain totals probably higher than what was observed because some gauges got washed away apparently. But I don't see this storm dropping more than like Mitch did. It could. It very well could, but our latest indications would say that it's not going to drop that much. Regardless, it is a catastrophic situation. 55 inches of rain versus 75 inches of rain. You're still going to be seeing catastrophic flooding. These areas have already been saturated by local weather lately. So there is no capacity for additional rainfall here. So it's really a bad situation, and I believe we're starting to see catastrophic storm surge coming ashore with this storm as well. In the National Hurricane Center, in that regard, I believe, said yes, surge as high as 14 to 21 feet is possible onshore. So it's absolutely imperative that your preparations were completed and that you're in a safe place right now, if you are in Nicaragua, on the northern side of this storm.
That is a good observation. I'd be inclined to agree. However, we do have some more questions that have continued to come in. What is the highest possibility that the storm could have a secondary peak?
I guess it depends on what you're referring to. If you're referring to the storm completing its Eyewall replacement cycle and peaking again before landfall, no. That's not happening. This storm is not going to be peaking again before landfall. That's not happening. The storm is going to weaken from this point forward over land. Now in the Caribbean, once the storm reemerges and its low-level circulation gets going again, I see a really good possibility of us having a significant hurricane impact to Jamaica or Cuba because this storm very nearly got to and could have gotten to, and they even could have been a Category 5, it was not in the highest ocean heat content that this basin has. The highest ocean heat content that this basin has is actually where the system is supposed to redevelop in the Caribbean. So, I mean, the conditions, it's hard to imagine conditions that are much better than this, but it would appear that the Caribbean does have that where the storm is going. So I'm going to be honest, I am a little worried about uh, the possibilities after this does reemerge offshore.
I would also like to add, when talking about the reemergence of the system, as you, I believe, already highlighted earlier, there is plenty of uncertainty in the forecast when it comes once it gets back out over waters. And yeah, there's a good chance that there will be a second peak of some sort. Now, how high is yet to be determined, but in general, we could be looking at a pretty poor situation in the Western Caribbean once again, potentially, especially given the poor steering flow that could allow the storm to meander over high ocean heat content.
Now, what are the conditions in the Caribbean Sea currently forecast to be for this storm when it gets there?
Well, right now, what's expected is that there won't really be much of a very strong steering flow going on. Of course, what we do know is the system will reemerge. Um, but when it comes to condition wise, I believe there is expected to be high levels of moisture in the environment, and of course, you have high ocean heat content available. Shear wise, though, it's yet to be determined. But I wouldn't imagine the shear to be too too bad for the system. But of course, there's much uncertainty, and this is days out still. So
Yeah, I'd say the general expectation, given what I looked at the GFS earlier this morning, would be the storm's going to be very large, and the system's going to be very large as it comes offshore. That I'm fairly confident in saying. Just because your maximum wind spread out as a storm like this weakens, and if it doesn't completely dissipate, I think we're going to see a much larger system moving offshore. The what it looks like is the steering currents will weaken as the storm gets towards Cuba, but at first it's going to be a pretty steady northeasterly movement, and with that, it looks like it's going to be as a result of the trough before this does get blocked by a high. So it looks like, at least to me, shear might be a little bit of an issue. Like 20 to 25 knots of shear could be possible, but again, that's yet to be determined. But still, a storm can very much strengthen in that kind of shear. I mean, we've seen storms like Paulette, which have strengthened and even gotten an eyewall going in 40 knots of shear, and we've seen storms like Delta in about 20 knots of shear completely collapse. So I'm not 100% sure how the shear is going to affect this storm, but as Orlando said, there's a lot of uncertainty with this situation.
If you do have any comments or questions about this storm as it approaches Nicaragua, you can send them into our live chat and they'll be forwarded onto our team for their thoughts over the next hour or so. So, this storm is quite clearly undergoing an hour replacement cycle, and I'm just looking on my phone here, and radar does indeed support that this storm is undergoing an hour replacement cycle still. So we could be seeing some further weakening as landfall occurs. How
I'm not
long is the
sure.
storm away from landfall right now? Is a question that's just been asked.
Hmm.
That's a really hard question to answer
Yeah,
because
this the movement of the storm is extremely slow, so it's very hard to say at the time.
Yeah, I know that we said that the storm moved about 4 miles in 25 minutes earlier. It went from 25 to 21 miles offshore. Given that, and you go with, okay, well, then about 5 miles every half hour, you're about 21 miles offshore. If that continues, we'd be seeing landfall in around 2 hours, around 16 UTC, or around 10 o'clock Central Time, maybe 10:30. If we take a look at some model guidance, the HWRF predicts a landfall to occur at around 18 Z or noon Central Time, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, which could very well happen. I mean, landfall is very uncertain. The HMON solution shows landfall a little earlier at around 15 to 16 UTC. What I can guarantee you is that within about 6 hours from now, this will be over land. I can nearly guarantee that. If it's not over land in 6 hours time, then I'm gonna be surprised, to say the least. But as of now, you can see the HMON solution showing a landfall around 15 UTC, a little later than that, and then you can see the HWARF solution calling for that landfall to happen a little later at 18 UTC, maybe slightly later than that. So that's what the models are thinking right now. My thoughts, again, I'm favoring the HMON solution just because of the storm's current movement. I anticipate this landfall to probably occur in about 2 hours' time, so around 16 to 17 UTC. But we'll have to see.
We are still waiting on the National Hurricane Center's advisory number 12 on Hurricane Eta, which is due in about 30 minutes from now. Is Eta undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle? Well, quite clear it is at this time. What is the sea surface temperatures currently around Eta right now? Last I checked, they are around 80 degrees Celsius, more than enough to favor a storm of this intensity right now.
Yeah, I just want to assure people this is not 80 degrees Celsius. I think you meant 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But yeah, the storm is over about 29 to 30 degrees Celsius waters right now. It's about 29 degrees, and those temperatures are going to drop off a little bit as it gets into more shallow water here. It's going to be weakening, I think, from this point forward as a result of just that alone. Shear's gone up a little bit, and again, land interaction. So all signs point to weakening from this point forward.
Interestingly enough, I've just had a look at the sea surface temperatures for this storm right now. They're currently around 29 Celsius, as you said, but interestingly, they do increase during the storm's quote-unquote second part of its life, I guess you could say, when it gets into the Caribbean Sea. So perhaps we could be seeing another bout of intensification in the Caribbean Sea. That does indeed bear watching. I'd just like to point out real quick that if anyone cared about the Eastern Pacific, there is Invest 97E currently active in the Eastern Pacific with a 90% chance of development and will probably become the next East Pacific tropical cyclone of the year later this day, or perhaps this afternoon, I should say. Is Eta's structure improving or still deteriorating, and is upwell occurring? What are our team's thoughts on that?
Eta's structure is deteriorating. There's no question about that. I mean, cloud tops look nowhere near as good as they did earlier today and last night. An eyewall replacement cycle's occurring. That outer eyewall that's trying to form is literally over land, so friction's going to screw that up, and that inner eyewall's already getting choked off. So you're seeing both eyewalls struggling, and if they both collapse in on themselves, that would be, that's honestly a realistic possibility. The strongest part of the eyewall, it appears, is over land right now. So while that's unfortunate because that means that you're getting those 140, 145 mile per hour winds, what it also means is that we're seeing this weaken faster than it could be. But yeah, the structure of the storm is deteriorating, and I don't see this strengthening anymore, at least for this bout of its life. After it moves over land, though, like we said earlier, this does have some uncertainty.
We've just received a question. Is there a typhoon in the Western Pacific that we could compare to Eta? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, Eta did look like a Western Pacific storm for sure. I know that a lot of people are drawing comparisons to Goni. In satellite appearance last night, I'm not gonna lie, it looked very similar. Luckily the wind speeds were found to be not even Category 5, and that does bear some questions with Goni and what its true intensity was as well. But I think that the other thing that it really stresses is that we see Satellite appearance isn't everything. You know, we had Dorian, 190 miles an hour, didn't look as good as Ada or Goni did, and you know, Ada is empirically weaker than Dorian. So, you know, I mean, satellites aren't everything.
Absolutely. We are now joined by Jacob. How are you, Jacob?
Doing good.
What are your thoughts on Ada right now as it is about to make landfall in Nicaragua?
It's looking like a pretty dangerous situation, and we're still going to see some excessive rainfall, which is very bad. We have to watch that for some significant flooding. But like Thomas said, the outer eye wall and almost the inner eye wall is over land, so it's really not going to strengthen anymore. It's just going to be weakening from here on out. So, still a dangerous situation, even though it is weakening.
Absolutely. Will the Eyewall replacement cycle be complete before the storm makes landfall? At this time, I would be inclined to say no, given that the western Eyewall appears to be being hindered, I should say, by landfall, by land interaction, I should say, actually. If you do have any comments or questions, please do send them in, and we will answer them in due course right now. When is the next recon flight for Ada?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. I know there was a schedule that was posted earlier today. But I'll take a look at that. I'll get back to you on that. I know there were 2 flights scheduled for today. I think we've had 1 flight. Here, let me take a look at that. Yep, flight 1 into Ada will be at 17:30 UTC. So we still have a little while before that. And then our next flight is expected at 23:30 UTC. So, we have 2 flights today. If the storm makes landfall before 23:30, I'm fairly certain that they will cancel it.
Now, I just have a question for you, Thomas. If a hurricane of this intensity does indeed move onshore, will they put recon out to the storm?
Well, I mean, when a storm moves on shore, you know, the biggest thing is that, you know, I mean, they can't go over land with reconnaissance aircraft because the reality is that, first of all, the wind data is going to be skewed at the flight level, and second of all, your SFMRs are no longer accurate. So, I mean, there's not much point in flying over land. Like with this storm right now, I mean, in order for recon to do its standard pass, they'd fly in, they'd do a north to south, they'd probably have to move to the east. They'd go up into the eye. They can't measure this side of the storm anymore, so they have to measure this, going through the middle, and then they'd probably leave. But the reality is with this system, you know, after it makes landfall, there's no point. You're not going to get an accurate pressure fix, really. You're not going to be able to get accurate winds over land. And of course, because the eyewall is over land, you're anticipating rapid weakening. And we already have observations on the ground. So there's not too much of a point in reconnaissance aircraft going over a storm, you know, when it's over land. With that being said, National Hurricane Center's latest advisory is anticipated to come out soon. We're running with the National Hurricane Center's intensity estimate of 145 miles per hour. I believe it's 936 millibars. Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, 145, 936. I do want to go over their key messages real quick for those that are new to watching this. So, first of all, catastrophic wind damage is expected where Ada's Eyewall moves onshore along the northeastern coast of Nicaragua this morning. Tropical storm force or greater winds are already occurring within the hurricane warning area in Nicaragua. A tropical storm warning is also in effect for the northeastern coast of Honduras. A catastrophic and life-threatening storm surge, along with destructive waves, are expected along portions of the northeastern coast of Nicaragua, near and to the north of where the center makes landfall. Water levels could reach as high as 14 to 21 feet above normal tide levels in some parts of the hurricane warning area. Preparations to protect life and property should have already been completed by this time. Through Friday evening, heavy rainfall from Ada will lead to catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding and river flooding across portions of Central America, along with landslides in areas of higher terrain. Flash and river flooding is also possible across Jamaica, southeast Mexico, El Salvador, southern Haiti, and the Cayman Islands. So there is a lot going on there as well.
That is good information too. It is indeed absolutely worth noting, Thomas. Thank you. If you do have any comments or questions, feel free to send them into our live chat, and they will be answered by our live team in due order. How much can ETA re-intensify when it regenerates in the Caribbean Sea? Well, I can tell you right now, we're at least looking at a tropical storm, at least, out of ETA when it regenerates into the Caribbean Sea. However, I wouldn't discount that it could have quite an erratic track, and it also could become another hurricane threat for some land areas once again. Has the storm weakened or maintained its strength since the last National Hurricane Center advisory, and will the National Hurricane Center initiate hourly advisories? That is an interesting question. I'm not quite sure if it has actually weakened a little bit. Judging by satellite imagery, I would say that it's probably weakened a little bit, and we are not sure if the National Hurricane Center will initiate advisories, hourly updates, I should say, on this system. But I'd imagine they probably should.
The National Hurricane Center only issues hourly advisories for tropical cyclones that are expected to impact the United States. They will not be initiating hourly advisories on this. Despite how dangerous it is. Back to the other question of whether the storm has weakened or not, I have a really hard time looking at recon and seeing the evidence for a 145 mile per hour storm. I personally think 149.38 is the best estimate to run with right now, and I hope that the National Hurricane Center follows that. I believe it's at 140, and given recon evidence that we saw last time, I'd even say there's an argument for 130. So I think it's definitely at most 140 miles an hour right now, and with the satellite appearance continuing to degrade, I'm sure upwelling is occurring as well. And the Eyewall replacement cycle, all signs that I see are pointing to a weakening storm.
Now, Thomas, if you could just pull up some imagery on the Western Pacific, because I'd like to go over the activity there in a few minutes. However, was there any evidence at all to support Category 5 intensity? I don't think there is. I would be inclined to agree with that assessment. There was no estimates to support a Category 5 intensity at peak for ETA. However, we did give it 155 miles an hour at peak, I believe, around 12 hours or so ago. So that did, of course, reach its peak density, luckily, not as a Category 5. However, it is weakening on approach to the coast of Nicaragua. So here's a look at the Western Pacific right now. You have Tropical Storm Goni in the South China Sea, which is a 40-mile-an-hour tropical storm right now, pushing towards Vietnam. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center's latest forecast does call for a brief peak at 40 miles per hour, really maintaining intensity for about a day or so before it weakens again. To me, it looks that large convective burst that's happening to the western side of Goni circulation looks to be the only thing that's keeping the storm alive right now. And the Joint Typhoon Warning Center are only forecasting what looks to be, perhaps, a remnant low making landfall in Vietnam. So that is really good news that the system may dissipate before reaching Vietnam. However, you can also see Tropical Storm Atsani off in the top right portion of the screen, which is stalling to the east-northeast of Luzon, with maximum today winds also of 40 miles per hour. forecast to gradually strengthen during the next few days, with reaching a peak intensity forecast by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center as of their latest warning, hot off the press. It's actually down to 65 miles per hour is what their forecasted peak is on the 6th. What are our team's thoughts on the scene in the Western Pacific right now?
What's going on in the Western Pacific is, we just watched a historic event occur just 3 days ago. So it's, it's much less active than it was then, I guess you could say. Goni is a mere shadow of what it once was. My thoughts are it's going to hit Vietnam as a tropical depression. Winds are going to be a little gusty, but the biggest threat's going to be that you could get over 500 millimeters of rainfall in Vietnam, which is lower than I was anticipating earlier this week, which is definitely good news. With it sunny, I think that there's the potential that this gets significantly stronger than forecast, but it continues to be weaker than it's forecasted to be. It's continued to go below consensus aids. So I do support the Joint Typhoon Warning Center with their very conservative, at this point, 65 mile per hour peak, because the models that have been more aggressive with it, they've just been dead wrong.
Absolutely. Do you think that this storm at Goni could potentially re-intensify a little bit as it pushes towards Vietnam, Thomas?
If you'd asked me that yesterday, I would have said for sure that's a no. It looks like crap.
I've got to interrupt you here, Thomas. We do have the update from the National Hurricane Center on Hurricane Eta, just off the press. Extremely dangerous Hurricane Eta continues to inch closer to the coast of northeastern Nicaragua. Life-threatening storm surge, catastrophic winds, flash flooding, and landslides across portions of Central America. Breaking news, the government of Nicaragua has issued a tropical storm warning from south of Seni Bay Sirpi to Laguna de Perlas. My bad on the pronunciations there. They are running with an intensity of 145 miles per hour and a pressure of 938 millibars. And they do say that this storm is now moving west-southwest at 5 miles per hour. That is indeed the latest from the National Hurricane Center. 145 miles per hour, 938 millibars. We'll have to wait and see.
145.
What did you say, Tardy?
I said they're keeping it at 145. That's intriguing. I'm going to need to see their discussion for that.
Yeah, we'll have to see the reasoning behind that. But I'd say 140, 145 is the right call right now. However, this storm continues to push towards Vietnam as there are now an additional tropical storm warning. I'd imagine that would be to the south of the hurricane warning area, I'd imagine. However, we'll have to see what that says on the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone. Looking at the National Hurricane Center's advisory, they are now forecasting the system to be what looks to be a remnant low in 48 hours. So we were right in that aspect, at least, Thomas.
So, I'm still surprised that it wasn't like that earlier. But, it is what it is.
And they are now forecasting, they really continued their day 4 and day 5 points. They probably just moved them up a little bit inconsistently with the storm. They are still forecasting 30 miles an hour and 40 miles per hour on day 4 and day 5. So that looks to be relatively the same when it comes to Eta. If you have any comments or questions as the National Hurricane Center has released their latest update, feel free to send them in to the comments area below. How far is the storm currently away from Bilsi in Nicaragua, is a question that we just got.
Before we get to that, I do have some breaking news from our chief hurricane analyst, Evan Williams. Despite the weaker than anticipated landfall, he is anticipating that the National Hurricane Center is significantly lowballing the amount of rain that will be forecasted from this storm. As a result, he is remaining with a stage 9 on the CDPS scale. So this is it remains a catastrophic extreme situation. That stage 8 downgrade that we thought was possible earlier has not occurred. Devin Williams keeping it at a stage 9.
That is not good information, I would be inclined to say, given that this storm is a extremely dangerous situation with heavy amounts of rainfall forecast as the storm pushes inland. I'd just like to read off the rainfall estimates from the National Hurricane Center's latest advisory. Ada is expected to produce the following rainfall amounts through Sunday morning. Much of Nicaragua and Honduras, 15 to 25 inches, that's 380 to 635 millimeters, with isolated amounts of 35 inches. Eastern Guatemala and Belize, 10 to 20 inches, that's 255 to 510 millimeters, with isolated amounts up to 25 inches. Portions of Panama and Costa Rica, 10 to 15 inches, that's 255 to 380 millimeters, with isolated amounts up to 25 inches. El Salvador and Southeast Mexico, 5 to 10 inches, that's 125 to 255 millimeters, with isolated amounts up to 15 inches. Jamaica, southern Haiti, the Cayman Islands can see an additional 3 to 5 inches of rainfall, with isolated storm totals of 15 inches, as Ada Part 2, I guess you could say, pushes off into the Caribbean Sea.
Yeah, I guess we could call it Ada Part 2 for now. I mean, we don't know if it'll be associated with the exact same bit of energy, so we don't know if it will retain the name or it will receive a new name just yet, but that's definitely something that we're going to be keeping an eye on with time. And I'm going to be interested to see whether or not, and really just how the system evolves from a meteorological perspective. Obviously, I'm not happy that it's going to be redeveloping, especially after the catastrophic situation that is obviously unfolding right now in Nicaragua. And yeah, this is just not a good situation in general.
We have the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. It is currently up on the screen. The general point still remains the same. Category 4 hurricane about to make landfall in Nicaragua. Interesting to note, though, their 12-hour intensity point, which is that M with a circle on it, that's their 12-hour point. They've actually lowered that intensity estimate down to 115 miles per hour. Personally, I think that's a little bit high, and I think that it might even be down to a Category 2 or even a Category 1 hurricane by that point.
It's certainly a possibility. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with when exactly the storm is going to make landfall. Again, I'm anticipating it within the next 6 hours, now within the next 5 hours or so. But it could very well be later than that. And, I think that it's just really, really difficult right now to forecast what exactly is going to happen with this. But we'll see. It's a difficult situation. You've got a stalling storm. Right now, if I had to make a projected time for landfall, I would say that it's going to happen in about an hour and a half.
As a interesting point of measurement, I'd say. Personally, I'm probably thinking a little bit later than that, Thomas. Given that the storm is still pretty slow moving, but it could make landfall really at any time now, really. Before Ada hits Jamaica and Cuba, will it remain a tropical cyclone? It is forecast to actually dissipate overland entirely and then regenerate in the Caribbean Sea. So, no, it will dissipate and then regenerate. And with that regeneration, it's not even fairly certain that that'll even be Ada. It could be in a completely different system. Right, Thomas?
Yeah, it definitely could be. We'll see what exactly does come out of that, but there is some evidence to indicate that it could be a completely new system. Still with the energy from Ada, but it's not going to be the same storm in general. So we'll just have to see what happens there, but it's definitely a situation we'll be watching, to say the least.
We do have the discussion of the National Hurricane Center They are saying Eta appears to have peaked in intensity overnight as an Eyewall replacement cycle occurred early this morning. Radar data from San Andreas reveals concentric eye walls, and the latest images received from that radar early this morning suggest that the inner eye wall has weakened. That's interesting. Around that time, the eye became cloud-filled and less distinct in infrared satellite imagery. An Air Force Reserve reconnaissance aircraft that provided a couple of center fixes this morning reported that the minimum pressure has risen about 15 millibars since last evening. The plane measured a peak flight level wind of 127 knots, that's around 145 miles an hour, and a few SFMR winds slightly higher, around 130 knots, which is 150 miles an hour. But those winds were flagged as suspect. A drop wind sonde in the southeastern Eyewall measured a surface wind of 138 knots, that's above 157 miles an hour, but the mean layer average winds from the sonde support a much lower intensity, and the instantaneous surface wind from the instrument is likely more representative of a wind gust. Based on the above data, the initial intensity is still set at 145 miles an hour for this advisory. Nonetheless, Eta is an extremely severe hurricane capable of causing very high storm surges and catastrophic damage. Once the center of the hurricane moves onshore later today, rapid weakening is expected. It is still not certain if the surface circulation will survive its trek over Central America during the next several days, but the official forecast continues to show the remnants of Eta emerging over the Caribbean Sea late this week. With that being said, the National Hurricane Center has released their update. They are going with 145 miles an hour, 938 millibars. I believe that pressure is actually slightly upwards from their intermediate advisory, so we are indeed seeing continued weakening of this system, which is a good thing. If you do have any comments or questions, please do send them into the comment section below, and we will answer them in due course. You were saying, Thomas?
I was saying, yeah, they had it at 936 at the previous advisory. I'm kind of surprised they didn't downgrade to 140, because at least last evidence that I saw would say 140 is the better call. But they've been doing this a lot longer than I have. But the latest evidence I see with the significant degradation of satellite appearance, and not only that, but the fact that reconnaissance aircraft is kind of borderline on that 145. I personally think that 149.38 is the estimate to go with.
Now, Thomas, we just received a question here. Do you think that the rainfall threat has lessened since it is weaker, or is it still the same?
Rainfall and storm strength don't have a direct correlation. So what you're going to see is, the stronger the storm, the more water that can be churned up through it. So, the stronger the storm, the more rain that can fall. The problem is when a storm's weakening like this, that means more rain is in the process of falling. So the fact that this storm was really strong and it's going to weaken very rapidly as it moves over land means that you're going to get an extreme rainfall threat out of this. We're expecting at least 3 feet of rain from this in isolated areas, and that's probably low. I'm seeing evidence, and I know that our chief hurricane analyst is as well, with over 4 feet of rain being a possibility. So it's regardless of strength, do not be fooled. The storm will be bringing significant rainfall. We've seen tropical storms dump numerous feet of rain on areas. I know Tropical Storm Allison is infamous for the amount of rainfall that it managed to drop. So it does not matter how strong the storm is, they can all drop significant amounts of rain and still bring catastrophic impacts.
Absolutely. I'd just like to read off the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center real quick. At 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the center of Hurricane Eta was located near latitude 13.6 degrees north, longitude 83.2 degrees west. That is roughly 30 miles south-southeast of Puerto Cabezas in Nicaragua. Eta is moving toward the west-southwest near 5 miles per hour. A westward or west-northwestward motion is forecast to begin later today and continue through Thursday. On the forecast track, the center of Eta is expected to make landfall along the coast of Nicaragua within the hurricane warning area today. The center of Eta is forecast to move farther inland over portions of northern Nicaragua through Wednesday morning, and they move across the central portions of Honduras by Thursday morning. Maximum sustained winds are near 145 miles per hour with higher gusts. Eta is a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. Little change in strength is likely before landfall, which is really quite sad, I have to say. Weakening will begin after the center moves inland later today. Hurricane force winds extend outwards up to 25 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend outwards up to 115 miles. That's actually down 10 nautical miles from the intermediate advisory, which is really, honestly, an interesting point. The estimated minimum central pressure is 938 millibars. So, Thomas, what are your thoughts on them decreasing the tropical storm force wind speed despite an Eyewall replacement cycle?
I mean, I think that that's pretty expected in this case. I mean, most of the time we talk about tropical storm force wind fields increasing in size as an Eyewall replacement cycle occurs. The problem is, in this case, that what is going on is that it's over land. So, you're getting friction. I mean, your radius of wind is just going to slowly get shredded as the storm goes over land. So it's I think that really what's going on right now is that outer eye wall is getting disrupted by land. It's not going to be able to complete and expand as much as it normally would, and that inner eye wall is about to really die off here, and I don't see it managing to expand as much as it normally would. And I think that the quadrants over land are going to continue to see less and less of a smaller and smaller tropical storm force wind field.
So you think that due to land interaction that the storm's going to weaken, obviously. What do you personally think, Thomas, and I'm sure other live team members can chip in with their thoughts here as well. What do we think that this storm will make landfall intensity-wise as?
It entirely depends on how long it takes to make landfall. At this point, I'm thinking 125 to 130 miles per hour is going to be the intensity you'll be looking at. And I'd think of a pressure in the mid to high 940s at that point, maybe into the low 950s.
So perhaps continued weakening. That is really good news, to say the least, I'd say. We do have some comments or questions that have came in here. How fast is Eta weakening as both the Eyewall and the Eye are holding on for dear life? I'd say it's weakening pretty slowly right now.
Yeah, it's not weakening fast enough to cause much of a notable change with the situation, really. When it comes to winds, the winds are still going to be extreme by the time it makes landfall. And overall, that
is a good observation, I have to say. Looks like the latest frames shows that convection is returning to the Eyewall. What are our thoughts on that?
Well, that's a new development. When it comes to that, I think what I have to say is that I'm not sure if recon confirmed, but I believe the Eyewall replacement cycle may be coming to an end, so that may be an explanation.
Yeah, I mean, there's this, convection. I mean, we're seeing a convective burst on the southern side. I think that outer eye wall is trying to establish itself here. I think it's really trying to fight away that eye wall. And you can see that burst is over water. But overall convection, I feel like, has been worsening in appearance. But that southern side is getting a burst off, and maybe this is the final bout of attempted strengthening from Eta before it hits land. I don't think it's going to manifest itself all that much. I think that this storm has peaked. I think there's not going to be much strengthening from here on out. I only see a weakening trend from here.
I've just plotted the nearest landmass to the storm. It's about 19 miles offshore right now. And judging by the National Hurricane Center's current movement, that would bring it on shore roughly in about 4 hours. But it could occur earlier than that. So we could be seeing a landfall perhaps at some time during this next hour of coverage, perhaps by 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We'll see. The storm continues to slow down. I know that my estimation was about 2 hours time. It's gone from. It moved about 5 miles in the first half hour of coverage. In the second half hour of coverage, it's moved 2 miles. So it's slowing down, which means that unfortunately the storm is going to, first of all, dump more rain, and second of all, is going to be able to maintain its intensity for longer.
Do we think that this storm will re-intensify before it makes landfall? No.
No.
I think that this storm will continue to weaken, and personally, if I were to make a forecast for this storm right now, I would probably forecast a landfall intensity of 140 miles an hour.
Yeah, the best it can do right now is probably maintain its intensity and at most increase by 5 miles per hour. Outside of that, I don't see it going any further.
No. I mean, just looking at the visible imagery right now, it's got quite the appearance to it. Its eye definitely isn't clear. So, we'll be seeing probably landfall pretty soon. If you do have any comments or questions, feel free to send them in to our live team, as the storm is forecast to make landfall relatively soon. How strong will Eta be when it nears Cuba?
It's a complicated question because we quite simply don't know. We quite simply don't know. We anticipate this storm to redevelop. How strong it gets is really up in the air right now.
At the minimum, I'd say at least 40 miles per hour, of course, because that's what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. But realistically, the ceiling just depends on how much the storm stalls in the Caribbean Sea. It could be anywhere from a tropical storm at peak to a major hurricane at peak, but it's like we always say, that's pretty far out, and there's very low confidence with that. At which hour will Eta make landfall? Well, it could make landfall anytime, really. It could make landfall in 5 minutes. Even a slight jog towards the west would bring the center onshore. Or it could make landfall, or it could not even make landfall the next 6 hours, and it makes landfall going into tonight. We honestly just don't know, because the storm is stalling offshore right now. What is the current season ACE value? I'm sure that someone could research that information for me and find out what that value is.
Just give me a moment. I do have a chart for this. The accumulated cyclone energy that would be average for this time of year, just before I do get it, and this is as of the 1st of November. The average ACE by this point is about 98 in the Atlantic. The current ACE, according to Colorado State University, is 149.1. And that is as of 2 days ago, with the number one ACE contributor being Teddy, producing a whopping 27.8 ACE.
So Thomas, with Teddy being number one, which storms are number two and number three? I'd imagine it'd have to be Laura of the shorts and perhaps Epsilon.
I think you might be a little surprised by this. Number two is Paulette
You'd have
at
to surprise me.
15.9 points, just because it lasted so long. And number three is Delta.
Delta.
Delta, 15.7 points.
I could honestly see Delta being number three, but I'm shocked that it's actually that high, given that it only lasted what, 5 days?
Didn't last long at all. It was just the sheer amount of strength it had. I mean, the only other storms around its intensity would be Laura, which scored 12.8 points, and now Ada. So the storm, we'll see. I think that Ada's contributed more points of ace than what's currently shown because this was updated 2 days ago. But we'll see.
Will the Eyewall replacement cycle be complete before landfall? Well, it sort of, kind of is complete already. It's sort of in the process of cleaning itself up, but it's too close to land that the outer eyewall is sort of becoming inhibited by land interaction, so it probably will sort of be stuck in this near complete eyewall replacement cycle up until landfall. Would I be correct with saying that, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing right now is the storm is attempting to basically get a disrupted structure back to normal. An eye wall replacement cycle is the disruption of the inner eye wall, the complete disruption of the inner core, and a new core to replace it. The problem is if the new core is interacting with land, it's going to have a really difficult time establishing itself because it's already getting disrupted before it's even fully formed. So I don't see this storm strengthening at all at any point whatsoever, and I don't see in any real reality whatsoever either this storm being really even maintaining its strength all that much. I think slow weakening upon landfall is the expectation at this point, and I think satellite appearance continues to manifest that.
What is currently causing Ada's slow movement? I'm sure that Thomas, you could go over that.
Yeah, so it has to do with the lackluster steering currents. There's virtually no steering currents at this point. The storm's being blocked by a high pressure system to the north, and the result of that is that you have very little in the way of steering. The storm is expected to accelerate as it does head towards land at least a little bit, but the stalling offshore is really unfortunate. I mean, we're getting rain just dumped upon these areas. But yeah, I'd say that the lack of steering currents is doing it, but eventually you'll get pushed westward in conjunction with the clockwise rotation of the high, and then you're going to see the high as well as a trough moving in, pick this storm up and swing it out of the way. So that's why it's expected to take a track generally like what I've just drawn here. So that's the expectation with the storm. The steering currents are the reason that it is stalling at the moment.
So, if you do have any comments or questions, please do send them in. I just want to point out that we will be ending this stream in about 20 minutes from now because we're just really uncertain when the storm will make landfall. And when the storm does appear to be making landfall, we'll probably be back on the air for landfall coverage. Are there any brewing systems forecasted in the next 2 weeks or after Ada we are done?
I mean, when it comes to new developments in the Atlantic, Ada's probably going to redevelop. So we're going to have that. And then also we have a Invest 97E in the Eastern Pacific to worry about as well. That's just within the next 5 days. In the next 2 weeks, I know we released a forecast just a few days ago regarding the possibility of new developments in the next 2 weeks. But I think that overall the areas to watch are going to be the Atlantic and the Western Pacific.
I'd honestly be inclined to agree. Now, I'd just like to take a little journey over to our friend, Invest 97E, this is what it's looking like right now, and it appears to be in the process of undergoing a tropical cyclone genesis. And I'm not exactly sure what the number would be, but if it did become the next tropical depression, I believe it would be around 20E or something like that.
Yeah, I'm unsure of where exactly we are because the Eastern Pacific season has been, let's just say, a sideshow compared to the Atlantic this year. Even the Western Pacific has been a sideshow to the Atlantic, which is not common. The Atlantic has been incredibly active this year. Um, but this storm in the Eastern Pacific is likely to develop in short order, and when it does, we'll probably see maybe a weak tropical storm out of it. But I'm not expecting anything of too much significance with it. I could very well eat my words with that, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just having a look on my phone here at the model guidance. The only model that really significantly strengthens it is the HWRF up to 50 miles per hour tops in around 24 hours from now. But the general model agreement takes it down below tropical storm intensity in only 48 hours from now. So this appears to be yet another weak system, unfortunately, in the Eastern Pacific. And I'm not exactly sure what the next name is in the Eastern Pacific. I believe it's Odellis, I believe, if I recall. So we'll have to look forward to seeing that name. If I'm not mistaken, that is actually the replacement name for Odile, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, we all remember Odile. That was a serious situation, to say the least.
Yeah, but the Eastern Pacific having signs of coming alive. If you do have any comments or questions, you can send them into our live chat right now. Are the GFS and European models now in harmony about what should happen towards the end of this week?
I'd assume that this is referring to Ada in the Atlantic.
Probably.
So they're definitely in harmony that a system is expected to redevelop out of Ada. What happens after that is a little uncertain. Both of them take it into Cuba, and then both of them kind of diverge a little bit in their solution after that. They both take it into the Gulf of Mexico. The GFS stalls it and strengthens it a little bit before it heads into the Yucatan. Then they have a Category 1 hurricane in the Gulf in November. And the European model, if I remember correctly, has the storm head into Cuba and strengthen into a Category 2 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico before heading in the general direction of Florida. So either way, they're both anticipating Ada to last for quite a long time after this, and another significant reintensification phase is possible, unfortunately.
Are there any new weather systems in the Western Pacific? Well, we have Goni and Etsani, but besides those, we did briefly, a few days ago, we did have Invest 91W, which, to be honest, I thought would have become a typhoon threat for the Philippines again. But it does appear that has not come to pass, luckily, and 91W has since dissipated.
Yeah, that hasn't really materialized. There's still a little bit of model hints that show that this could become a tropical depression or storm just before getting to the Philippines, but I don't know for sure whether that's even going to materialize. And then, of course, the models later in their runs continue with these ridiculous solutions that I won't even get into. But yeah, I mean, overall, there's a slight threat for the Philippines from former 91W, but at this point, I think that threat's pretty much exhausted.
I should point out, though, the GFS model in particular, just past the day 5 point, has some signs of some tropical cyclone activity appearing near Luzon. So that does bear watching. And just having a look at the European model, it also agrees with that. So we could potentially see long range some tropical cyclone activity once again in the Western Pacific. Do we expect another November system in the Atlantic? What are our team's thoughts on that?
Uh, oh my. Well, I mean, the Atlantic's the Atlantic.
So
I'm
there's slight warning.
anticipating. I mean, I guess it depends on what counts as another system. I'm definitely expecting Ada's remnants to redevelop and stay for a while. Other than that, I'm not certain we're gonna get anything else. But if I had to bet on it, I'd say we'll probably get something in the subtropics this month. And I also think we're just gonna get one more storm in November, probably in the Caribbean, in the late November because it's the Caribbean and it's 2020. So that's my thought process. So we'll see what happens.
So here's my question for you, Thomas. Here, since we are in the month of November, where is typical tropical cyclone genesis occurring in the Atlantic? Where does it typically occur in November?
I mean, it's very limited in November. Um, it's very limited. I'd say the Caribbean. You have two places, and I'll take a look at a basin-wide shot of the Atlantic just so that way I have a map of the basin itself. Um, and basically, you have two areas that are normal in November, and those areas are the Western Caribbean, which is what we're seeing right now, and then you also sometimes get some things in the subtropic. So that's really the normal areas of development.
So those are the areas to watch, and we'll obviously be having to watch for those areas of potential tropical cyclone, signs of tropical cyclone activity. I'd just like to point out we are now joined by Tim. How are you, Tim?
Good morning, gentlemen. Yeah, I've been sitting here backstage just waiting to come on. Did take a look at the center fix for Ada. It has actually gone well southwest of what the NHC forecast cone and our forecast cone had gone. It is now 25 miles to the east southeast of Prinzapolka, which is well south of the Puerto Cabezas area where we were initially thought this was forecast to make landfall. And I'm just now getting the first look at Ada this morning, and wow, this is not the same beast that we were seeing, say, 12 hours ago. A lot of the minus 80s and 85s that surrounded the entire eye are gone. It barely has minus 70s around it, and where we were seeing a really strong 4 or 5 nautical mile eye is pretty well gone. So this is nowhere near the beast that we were seeing yesterday that we thought could be category 5. I wouldn't even put this as a category 4 at most, but I've seen the NHC has kept it at 145 as of their 10 o'clock advisory this morning.
So, Tim, given that the storm has undergone an Eyewall placement cycle, um, what intensity do you think the storm will make landfall at?
I would honestly say, due to how it's looking on satellite imagery now, because I'm looking off of the rapid scan, I would say this is on a downward weakening trend. I would not be surprised if this dips to maybe category 3, 125, maybe borderline category 4 at 130 before it makes landfall. But with its forward movement speed being only 5 miles an hour, we're probably looking at a landfall probably around the 2 or 3 o'clock Eastern time frame, unless it decides to get itself in gear and get inland closer.
Absolutely, and we are indeed forecasting very heavy rainfall amounts as the storm pushes inland, upwards of 25 inches in some spots. So that will lead to river flooding, flash flooding, as well as landslides in mountainous areas, unfortunately, due to this storm being in its area and stalling right now. I'm just going to take a brief reading here in a moment or two about how far the eye is offshore. I'm going to guess it's roughly around 17 miles or so offshore, so it's moving ever so slightly towards the west still, and it'll probably make landfall in a few hours from now.
Yeah, the last reading I took was 25 miles east southeast of Principolca, and it is due east of the town of Quanwalta. Both of these being well to the south of the Puerto Cabezas. They're still both in the Atlantico Norte region of Nicaragua, and the land profile in that area, it is primarily farmland. There is a couple rivers that do run through the area. So Quanwalta, Principoca, up to the town of Walta and Hall over, all these being on the coast of the Atlantico Norte region of Nicaragua, getting hammered this morning by this powerful system.
Absolutely. Are there possibilities that Ada would not regenerate and completely dissipate over land? Yes, that is entirely possible. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to occur, unfortunately.
I think it depends on its forward movement speed. A lot of the models and the NHC count in our forecast do have it coming back out over the Central Caribbean, just to the north of the Honduras region. But the terrain, once it gets into the Honduran region, it's very mountainous. So that's going to be really the determining factor on if those mountains and that high terrain really rip that center apart before it gets back out over the open water.
Absolutely. Could we potentially see Ada become another tropical cyclone after it emerges off the Caribbean, back into the Caribbean Sea, I should say? Yes, we entirely could. It's still entirely uncertain if it will even be Ada in the first place, but that does absolutely indeed bear watching. Could this possibly turn around and do what Hurricane Lenny did? No.
No.
No, its forward movement speed is pretty well set. This is going right into Nicaragua. There's no way, unless we get some incredible trough or something that comes through, that we're going to see this go west to east across the Caribbean Sea like we saw with Lenny. That's just not in the forecast right now.
Absolutely. We will be ending live coverage here shortly, so we'll have to go to the automated streaming service, I'd imagine. But we will probably be back for additional live coverage when the storm is making landfall. As right now, the storm appears, in my eyes, to just be sitting offshore right now. So I'm sure one of our team members could answer this question for me. What are we currently seeing right now in terms of the storm's movement?
It's moving west. We know it's moving west, and it's moving west at a very sluggish pace. It's been slowing down. I don't know how far west. It moved about 7 miles in an hour, so I'd say 7 miles an hour. But the problem is that it moved 5 miles in half an hour and 2 miles in the next half an hour. So I'd say anywhere from 4 to 7 miles per hour is your motion speed. I'd probably go with about 5 miles an hour, which would mean you'd probably see landfall in about 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours.
It's interesting, Thomas, because the NHC has been saying it's been moving west at 5, but looking back from where I remember it at last night when we had recon in the system to where it is now, I would almost say this is moving almost a southwest jog versus more of a westerly jog, which if it continues on its path, this would put this right into the northeastern corner of the Atlantico Sur province of Nicaragua. I mean, obviously, we would like to see it finally make eventual landfall, which would not be great for this area, but due to how I'm seeing it on satellite, I mean, it looks more southwest than it does west, to be honest.
I'd honestly be absolutely inclined to agree, but with stalling systems, it really is hard to tell what direction they're moving. Could this storm get all the warm water since it's been stalling off of the coast? That is called upwelling, and it entirely probably honestly is. Given that it's
I'm really interested to see what that sea surface temperature chart looks like here in a day or two when they update it to account for this storm. I'll be interested to see what tomorrow morning's update looks like.
All right, we will be ending the live coverage here at the halfway point of this hour. Thank you for watching this stream. You can catch us on all of our outlets. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at 413. You can also follow our regional channels on YouTube and Twitter. You can follow 413 US for United States stuff. You can also follow 413 UK and Ireland for UK stuff. You can also follow us on Twitter and YouTube at 413 AU for Australian stuff. And then there's 413 Extra for extra stuff. If you would like to chat with our team members, you can also join our Discord server. That is discord.gg/413. Thank you all for watching this live coverage as Hurricane Ada is making landfall in about a few hours' time. We'll probably be live once again tonight when that landfall is occurring. However, we are ending the coverage here. Thank you all for watching, and stay safe in Nicaragua as the storm makes landfall.